As some people might be aware, I am a psychologist in real life. Yes, I actually do have a PhD, which I trust is likely surprising to some people, and understandably so. Well, my interest in the human condition stretches as far back as I can remember. Even as a kid, I often found myself wondering about things that I later learned most people just don't think about that often. Naturally, as beer and brewing became a bigger part of my life, this tendency began to creep in. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and in this episode, contributor Matt Del Fiacco is with me to talk about a side of beer that seems to go largely ignored.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense because it's one of those invisible factors, I think. And it's one of those things like we really don't think about because it's just constant. It's all around us. It's 100% of our life. It's one of those a fish in water doesn't know it's in water situations.
Right.
But the role of bias and the role of expectation in the way we perceive the world and the way we kind of have this sensory perception of the objective world around us. And by objective, I basically just mean there are atoms in the world and there are chemicals that exist.
Right.
But essentially everything else is just perception. It's the ways in which we interpret those things, and it's there's a lot of science done on it. Professional breweries and professionals in like food sensory have done this for an incredibly long time. It's something we've known about outside of food for just tons and tons of time, but it's one of my favorite subjects. This is what I do partially professionally, or not partially professionally, but it's part of my work as a qualitative researcher. So I'm super pumped to talk about this. This is my favorite thing.
Yeah. Oh man, the losophy part of Brewlosophy was almost purely driven by my fascination with the way people perceive things and how we work. And we've performed a few experiments that are focused on various types of bias. We're going to be discussing those results and their implications in a bit. And I have to admit, though, as much as I am excited to talk about this stuff, I'm a tiny bit concerned that some people might take what we say in the wrong way. It sounds, Matt, like you can relate with this, but
yeah, man, I do. I definitely have a little anxiety going into this this episode, just because it's like I said. So it is like it's all around us, and because of that, when we talk about bias, especially the rhetorical baggage in the word bias, it's like it's telling someone like, oh, you're biased. You don't have an objective view of the world.
Yeah,
and it's first of all, that's fucking nonsense. No one has an objective view of the world. You are not outside of the water.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, I think what it is, I've studied this stuff for almost 20 years now, and I think what it is that we like to feel like we're in full control of our faculties. That the decisions we make are purely 100% thoughtful, thought out decisions. So just to nip this potential for offending somebody in the bud, what we're talking about here is the ubiquitous nature of bias. We're not talking about somebody being intentionally prejudiced. Bias is always there, and that's the mentality we're approaching this entire show from. This idea that bias can be consciously suspended such that a person has the ability to be truly objective. Yeah, that's not how bias works. Our point isn't to be judgmental. We certainly don't intend to make anybody feel bad. We'll be discussing research and science, neither of which care about feelings, and that is not how we're gonna couch this episode. If what we talk about in this beer show upsets anyone, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to chat or make an appropriate referral. All right, to anyone who lives around any of us, we'd love to get you involved as a participant. We've got contributors in Anchorage, Alaska, Chicago, Illinois, Denver, Colorado, Auburn, New York, Atlanta, Georgia, and Fresno, California. Email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and I will connect you with the contributor closest to you. If you want to help us to continue producing this show, you can head over to brewlosophy.com/support, where you'll find a list of links to use when you do your online shopping. You can also receive rewards in return for your support by becoming a patron of Brewlosophy over at patreon.com/brewlosophy. Rewards include things like access to the Brew Crew private forum, unpublished recipes, and rad discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com. For a pledge of just $3 a month, you'll be invited to attend a monthly live Q&A session with some cool folks. Coming up, we've got Dr. Charlie Bamforth from the UC Davis Brewing Program, Vinny Chilurzo from Russian River Brewing Company, Annie Johnson from Pico Brew, and John Kimmich from The Alchemist. And for those patrons pledging at the $5 level or higher, you'll be entered into a monthly drawing for a $50 gift certificate from our friends at lovetobrew.com. Again, you can learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/brewlosophy. All right, feedback this week is brought to you by Imperial Yeast, who, let's be honest, they're they're freaking killing it. I've been seeing more and more people posting about their positive experiences with Imperial Yeast on social media lately, and it makes sense seeing as they pack 200 billion cells of the purest yeast into each pitch-right pouch and have a bunch of rad strains to choose from, lagers, clean American ales, Belgians, whatever you want. They've got it. I just designed a recipe this morning, in fact, that will be fermented with A31 tartan, which I've used in the past and I love. Go check out all they have to offer at imperialyeast.com and snag some for yourself at More Beer and Great Fermentations. Okay, listener Blake Wood emailed the following. In episode 50, that was our Brewing A number 5 episode, you fielded a question about how to purge the headspace in a fermenter of oxygen after dry hopping. I bottle carbonate my homebrew, so I don't have a CO2 system, but I have a simple solution to this problem. Go to the local market and buy the smallest bag of dry ice you can, typically $1 or $2, drop a piece about the size of a silver dollar into the fermenter, put the airlock back on, several headspace volumes of CO2 will be produced by the dry ice, effectively purging all the oxygen from the headspace. Well, Matt, I've spent some time thinking about this, and I can't seem to come up with a reason it wouldn't at least be better than doing nothing. Dry ice is an inert thing, and while I'd never suggest using it in a closed container, Blake says to put the airlock back on the fermenter, and that seems like it'd allow the pressure to escape. Do you have any thoughts on this?
This is definitely something this kind of catches me off guard. Like I haven't heard of this as like a practice before. I've never really even considered the use of dry ice in that capacity. I can't really think of a reason it wouldn't work unless, I know it's a little bit of dilution, but that's, I think, to be expected. And that's not too big a deal. So I don't know. I think it would probably be better than doing nothing in the capacity of, especially like your hoppy beers. I don't know. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah. I mean, again, later on in the email, he talks about carbonating samples of beer with dry ice. I didn't want to include that because when I was a kid, I used to make dry ice bombs with soda bottles, and I wouldn't, I wouldn't want anybody accidentally having one of those go off in their hand.
Yeah, careful there.
But this, again, the airlock's going to allow for the escape of that pressure. I don't know. It seems like it could work. I don't feel like going and getting dry ice, and I'm fine doing, other things. But hey, give it a shot if you've been struggling with oxidized hoppy ales. So thanks for the tip, Blake. If you have any show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or leave us a voice message by calling 951-444-0320. All right. Well, a while back, homebrewer Brandon Clark sent me a beer that he made, including a grain that, Matt, you recently had some experience experimenting with. He used rye and a saison, and I served it to my friends.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim. It's Pilsner. Dip. No, it's not. It's dark. It's too dark. Too dark to be a Pilsner. It's a Filsner.
A Pilsner. This is a Pilsner.
Yeah, it's dark and toasty.
I can't say toasty
Shut
yet.
up. You don't know anything about anything.
I know this.
Don't act like you know what this is.
Ooh.
It's all right. It's all right.
It's not bad.
You know what? It's not all right. I like it. Come on, tell me. You can't just keep saying it's good.
It's smooth.
Oh.
It's not lingering around in my mouth. I would drink this.
I'll tell you what's in it. You want to hear what's in it?
Yeah, tell me.
Mushrooms and ferns.
Wow.
Mushrooms and ferns.
Nothing like that.
Mushrooms and ferns.
It's smooth.
And Britannomyces is...
It's got like cinnamon taste to it.
Midichlorians. It's got a high midichlorian count.
It's got a little like cinnamon.
Cinnamonum. Dude, we have no idea what it is.
I don't.
But I'm gonna go ahead and say that whatever it is, I bet it's the version of that. It's really good at being the version of that, and I like it. I give it 6 jerseys. It's really good. I'll drink it.
I'll go 5, 6.
Okay, for a total of 652.5 Jersey Tims. I like it.
Okay, so this comes from Brandon Clark in Plano, Texas. He calls it Saison du Rye.
That's what it was, a saison. I knew it. It was some weird name.
So he says, on June 19th, 2018, my wife and I welcomed our first child, Rye Clark, into the world. To celebrate his birth, I decided to brew a saison with a bit of rye malt in the grain bill since I knew we would have several family members coming into town to visit. I actually tapped the keg the day he came home from the hospital, June 22nd, bottled 14 or so before the keg was emptied on June 29th. It was a hit amongst the friends and family. Apologies if some of the carbonation was lost during the bottling process. Overall, I found this to be a light, fruity, tasty saison with a bit of spice from the rye. I hope you enjoy. And here is a photo of the beer and the baby. It is an adorable beer. or I'm sorry, it's an adorable baby. The beer looks totally fine. Congratulations, Brandon. This is amazing.
Congrats,
we
Brandon.
all of us have children. We all know how incredibly miraculous it is to welcome a child into the world. So congratulations to you.
Wow, mushrooms and ferns. Maybe at first thought that doesn't sound appealing, but this was a saison, Matt. And in my mind, saisons have kind of an earthy kind of character to it, especially when you're using rye.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it would be too out of style. And I mean, it definitely sounds delicious. It sounds adorable. But the whole, I mean, yeah, it doesn't seem out of place. And like you said, like I just did the malted rye, the rye malt experiment in a pale ale, and I experienced the same thing, that it's very earthy. I didn't get any of that spicy quality, especially like people talk about like the spicy rye bread sort of thing. I do not get that at all. I'm consistent with the earthy comments. So yeah, it sounded delicious.
It was a great beer. I sampled these alongside the guys as well. I really liked it a lot. And I thought that, as far as being a saison, which isn't a style of beer that Tim and Jersey are drinking all too often, basically never, the fact that they both, they enjoyed it. Their palates are widening. Their horizons are broadening. And I thought that was pretty cool. So Brandon, thank you for helping to introduce my friends to a more hoity-toity style of beer. If you'd like your beer or any other fermented beverage you make or feel like sending in to us to be reviewed by Jersey and Tim on the show, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we will get you all set up. All right, we'll be back right after these words from the folks who make the show possible. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD, that's BRUPOD, at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer, and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you.
Hi, I'm Stephen Leach, creator of Brow Supply Brewing Systems, here to tell you about our latest Unibrow brewing system. Modeled after the brew-in-a-bag method, the Unibrow uses the same kettle for both mashing and boiling, replacing the fabric bag with a stainless basket that can hold up to 20 pounds of grain. A heating element is run by an electric controller that allows for the maintenance of specific mash temperatures and makes mashing easier than ever. Each Unibrow is shipped with a counterflow chiller and the parts required to brew a batch of beer. We're really proud of the Unibrow, and we know you'll love it as much as we do. Go check it out at browsupply.com and sign up for our email list to receive special deals in your inbox.
Bias is one of those concepts I feel people tend to, understandably, be rather confused about. I think a large part of this confusion stems from the fact that, at least in our culture and society, bias is generally viewed as a bad thing. Consider the top definition I found when Googling the term. Prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. Now, based on this, pointing out bias in one's evaluation of beer amounts to an accusation. That is not what we are talking about here, and I want to make this point very clear. While there's no doubt this type of bias exists in beer and brewing, our focus is on what's referred to as unconscious bias, the stuff that influences us without our awareness. It is necessarily unintentional. In fact, it just is what it is. We're all biased all the time, and while some would contend that becoming aware of and accepting these biases allows us to better account for them, there's little that can be done to be free of them. And now, with that sermon out of the way, when we talk about the role of bias as it pertains to beer, a major area of focus has been on the influence of the drinker's expectations. And I've got a fun little story to tell about my experience with expectation in beer before we get into some of the experiments that we're going to discuss. Probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I brewed a pale ale that was fermented with the Fuller strain. This was White Labs WLP 002. It's the same as Pub Ale from Imperial, and I believe 1968 from Y Yeast. Many view this yeast as being very expressive. It's English in origin. So I served it to a group of my brewing buddies, and I told them that the yeast that was used in it, that's sort of what you do. You talk about your recipes and whatnot. And the topic of conversation became how estery this pale ale was. And I'll be honest, they were saying the esters really balanced the hop character, went with the hop character well. So it wasn't a negative review. They were just pointing out, how estery this beer was. And I started to think, are they noticing actual esters, or did my priming them by telling them what yeast was used, did that influence their perception? So, I was obviously amused by this whole thing, and knowing that they know I always do experiments, I came back a little bit later with another sample of beers, and I told them, hey, I took half of that wort and I fermented it with the Chico strain, notably clean American yeast strain, and asked them, what do you guys think about this one? And as you might expect, it was only 4 or 5 guys, but every single person there was saying, yeah, much cleaner, much crisper, probably attenuated. It was the same exact beer. It was the same exact beer that I gave the guys, the same one fermented with 002, but nobody noticed esters in it. People experienced it as being drier and cleaner and more American-like. So, that was one of those things that really inspired me to look more into the role I think bias plays in beer evaluation.
Man, absolutely. And it's actually, it's wild that you did that, because it's very relevant to a lot of the actual, the research that's been done in the field. And, a lot of this is around wine that we see done
Sure.
in the field. But there's definitely been some studies around beer, and I like to focus on those when I talk with people, because it feels a little more easy to relate. But unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to everything in this, there's just so much research out there on the role of expectation and bias in in perception, and the ways in which your senses all influence one another, and they're very interwoven, very codependent. But the specific thing you did, and I'll only touch on this really quickly because it's one of our unplanned discussions. There's this excellent piece by Frederick Brochet, Brochet, for those interested, and he has a piece called "The Chemical Object Representation in the Field of Consciousness," which is it's an excellent study done on wine, where he had 57 tasters sample 2 wines 1 week apart. And the first wine that they tried was, a really great wine, really fantastic, really high class. And then he would have them describe it and do a word association activity. The second wine was fine. It was fine. It was a table wine. It was something you might get just for a casual dinner or something, very, not like a special event wine. And then to describe that. And then I get to let in everyone on this secret, which is fun, which it's the same exact wine. It's exactly what you did. He served the exact one to people. And people, it shouldn't surprise anyone, based on who we are, that the results were that people really described the fine wine really positively, very smooth, very, they preferred it. They thought it was rich. They thought it had depth, all these things. And then the table wine, they described it as fine. It had few more negative descriptors, than the positive wine. So it's just crazy. The ways,
Yeah.
it's the same wine. There's no additives. There was no dyes. There was nothing like that. It was just a lie about the quality of the wine.
Well, and that's the thing, is perceived quality. And that, that is a topic that gets a lot of focus in the marketing world, really, is how
Absolutely.
do we, how do we make something look more luxurious than it is? How do we create hype? And, in like, you take my little anecdotal experience, which I don't have hard data on, that was completely observational, but then you've got the experiment that you're talking about as well. It doesn't really matter whether there were actually esters in the beer that I served them or not, or whether or not one of the beers was actually better than the other, which is subjective anyways, really. What to me,
Yes.
what's fascinating is the fact that when these people expected something to be there, that it influenced the way they perceived the thing they were drinking. And again, like I mentioned before, people so badly want to believe that they are in full control of their capacities. And we see this, and I'm just going to call it out now. We see this with every experiment that we published on the site. People coming in and saying,
man.
"Well, obviously, your tasters aren't trained well," and that has nothing to do with it. To assume. Boy, I'm on my high horse now. But to assume that you have this capacity that other people don't, that requires just a whisper of arrogance. It's particularly if you haven't gone out and performed triangle tests, or you haven't gone out and actually tried these things out yourself. You and by you, I'm talking about everyone on Earth, are equally as influenced by bias as everybody else is, by your expectations of what something is going to take or taste like. So, experiments like these are so easy, they're fun, and while they may be potentially friendship ending, you got to choose the right folks you do this with.
Absolutely.
Anybody can do it, and again, I bet cash money that the results would be similar to ours. So
Let's tie this back to beer really quick, just because we were talking about wine. I know you've done that. There is one experiment that I think everyone will love because it's an easy read, and by which I mean, it's not very technically written. It's written to be very accessible, and I love it.
don't talk down to our listeners, Matt. Come on now.
I'm not actually. You know what? I had to look up the least amount of words going through this, so that is my benchmark for how accessible this is.
Okay,
is like how often I have to reread a paragraph.
Yeah, right.
But anyways, this article is called "Try It, You'll Like It," which just that title speaks to me in a lot of ways. But it's done by the researcher Leonard Lee from the Columbia Business School and researchers Shane Frederick and Dan Early from MIT. And they did this experiment at two different bars, so two pubs that they got to buy into this process. And in this experiment, they had patrons evaluate two beers. One, a regular, quote unquote, regular beer, and then their kind of special MIT brew. Now, unknown to the participants, the MIT brew had a special ingredient, but it was otherwise identical to the regular beer, by which I mean it was literally the regular beer with a special ingredient in it. Not like brew. It's not what we do, where we try to do the single variable experiment and they're brewed on two separate systems and blah, blah, blah. It was literally just the exact same batch of beer.
If I'm not mistaken, didn't they just add a couple drops of balsamic vinegar to the MI? And
so that's the trick. They added a couple drops of Trader Joe's brand balsamic vinegar.
That's the problem. I mean, they got the good stuff at TJ's. Yeah.
So they and actually it's a hilarious in the afterwards of that article, they thank Trader Joe's for making such a good balsamic vinegar. So maybe I should try that out. I haven't. But they established three different groups of people. And those groups were asked to rate their beer at different times in the process. The first group was asked to rate it without ever knowing the secret ingredient. The second group was asked to rate it, but they were told that secret ingredient before they even tried the beer.
And they called that the knowledge group. That was the knowledge group, right?
That was the knowledge group.
Ahead of time what the variable was.
Yep, exactly. And then our third group was really interesting. They were the group who had to try the beer blind, not knowing the secret ingredient. being told the secret ingredient immediately afterwards, and then asked to rate it. So those are the three groups that were established.
I love this because, and that third group was called, they referred to that as the experience group. So you've got your control group. They're totally blind. They're never told about anything like, hey, taste this beer or taste these beers or whatever it is and rate them, right? Whatever. The second group, the knowledge group. So those who had a preconceived idea of what was done to basically adulterate this beer, they had to rate it, knowing what was wrong with it, quote unquote, wrong with it. And then the third group, just to be clear, was the experience group. So they experienced the beer, that all before they were told what was going on. Oh, what a beautiful experiment. I love this so much.
It really is. Like, it just feels right in a lot of ways. But anyway, honestly, like, because this episode is what it is and we are who we are, this experiment, the results came back almost what you'd expect. So the control group, who they never knew the secret ingredient, they rated the beer the highest. Everyone, it was good. Everyone liked it, rated it the highest. The group that sort of came in second in terms of preference, in terms of, how much they enjoyed it, was group 3, the experience group. Yep. The people who were told the secret ingredient before their rating. And then finally, last place, group 2, the knowledge group, who knew the entire time that there was red wine vinegar in it, which is astounding because every group of people was tasting the exact same beer.
Exactly. And it's what's fascinating to me. So if you were to go and you were to read this, they use some other terms that I think are kind of interesting. The researchers in this one refer to that knowledge group as the top-down group, and that's just a form of processing that they're referring to. That when you know of something and then you proceed to evaluate it, they refer to that as top-down. And then the experience group is bottom-up. So you're evaluating and you're doing your kind of psychological mental evaluation prior to knowing what's going on, and then you learn it. They call that bottom up. The fact is that the MIT beer, so that beer that had the vinegar in it, was rated significantly lower by the knowledge group, the people who were aware of what was going on. It was significantly lower than both of the other groups, but especially the experience group. The implications to this, I think, are pretty crazy.
It really is. There's so much we can, I think this has a couple additional avenues of exploration that are opened up by this research study. Specifically one that jumps out to me that I would love to do, or love to read more about, or I don't want to have to perform it. It'd be a big study. But I would love to know if I would love to see what the pattern is of preference, for something that people expect balsamic vinegar to be in, as opposed to beer, where the expectation is that there is no balsamic vinegar in this, right? That what I know of beer, the mental model I've constructed, I've given a talk similar to this a couple times, and I would use the term the prototypical model, which is, the central idea in your head that you have about stuff, right? And that's called prototype theory. Sure. And one of the radial aspects, one of the things that construct my mental model of beer is certainly not balsamic vinegar.
Yeah.
So I would love to see this study again, something where balsamic vinegar is a part of the prototype in someone's head about it, because it's that contrast, I think, that draws out I don't enjoy this. Well, because you think it doesn't belong.
Yeah.
But you can't.
Well, so what I thought would be really interesting, and perhaps something like this has already been done, but basically a replication of the same exact experiment, except you don't add any balsamic vinegar at all. So you tell people, you do the same exact design, you do the same setup, you've got these 3 groups, but none of the beers have any balsamic, even though some are told balsamic is in there. Would they still taste the beer differently? And this is something that I've done in the past, sort of, just on more anecdotal level. I told somebody one time, it was a group of people, again, hanging out in my garage, that I'd made a beer that had honey malt in it. And this was back, I don't know if you remember this, Matt, but back in the day when honey malt used to get a lot of crap.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And it was supposed to be cloying.
Exactly. Oh, you use more than 5%, you're creating a sweet sugar beer. And that was just never my experience. So I made I made like an IPA or something with 0 honey malt. But the batch that I had made before that, which you can find the recipe for on the site, it's called Lil Something or Lil Slack. But I had made that, and it won an award at a local competition, and it had a good chunk of honey malt. And so my friends were like, how did a honey malt IPA beer win? So I had another IPA on tap. They came over and I told them honey malt was in it. And of course, all of the replies were that it was too sweet. And this thing was like 90%, pale malt and maybe a little bit of Vienna. And that was it. But when you're expecting there to be a flavor, and what I wonder is how knowledge of anything, you look at judging, and this is something we're going to do shows on judging, I promise you, and we'll dig more deep into my my thoughts about that. But you look at the way judging is set up, and ideally, BJCP judges, when they are judging a beer, they really don't know anything other than style. When it comes to that beer, and again, ideally that's a good thing. But how many times nowadays does that style include something like oak or wood aged or New England IPA? We have these expectations that are built based on that. And, again, more anecdote, but I've entered beers that I just thought, they were never oak aged, or they were never, they didn't have any roasted malt, but they kind of, to me, tasted like they might. I'll enter those under those specific categories, and they tend to fare fairly well, I got a bronze. Oh no, what was it? I think it was an honorable mention at, the 2015 or 2016 first round of Chicago National Homebrew Competition for wood age in the wood age category, which used to be a different category prior to the 2015 guidelines. Right.
But it just had bourbon in it. There was really it was never oak aged. It was just blended with a little bourbon. And there's like kind of that, you have maybe some oaky notes from the bourbon. And then there's also this there's this association of bourbon in beer with barrel aged.
Yeah, totally. Oh my gosh.
We have this inherent connection between those things that's been established just by the prior context that we've been introduced into those things out in the market and out in the wild, right? And I think that's a huge part of this discussion in terms of talking about bias and talking about perception, is that those things are learned and contextual behaviors. They're things that are established through your prior experiences, and that just shapes the way you interpret the world around you, because your brain makes sense of the world in that way. And
Absolutely.
it's not good or bad. It's just the reality of the way in which you're able to stay sane, and the way in which you're able to learn new things and do new stuff. And there's some research that would go as deep as to say that the language you use and the language you speak even, and there's an excellent book on this for those who are, I won't even talk about it, but it's called Metaphors We Live By George Lakoff. Excellent book. But basically just the language you use influences the way in which you think about and perceive things. And it's super, super interesting. It's a great topic.
Well, and that's what I mean by it just is what it is. There's no intention behind this. No. The people in the MIP, the participants in the MIT study, it's not like they were sitting there intentionally trying not to like the beer. Especially the knowledge group, the people who were aware that it was dosed with vinegar. They weren't doing that. Again, maybe there is a little bit of I know that flavor is not supposed to be there, which I believe. I read the entire article. I believe those researchers set it up that way on purpose. We're going to do something that is notably not supposed to be in beer. Well, as I said, I've always been interested in this kind of stuff, and so curious to learn more about the triangle test. When I first got started, I was kind of influenced also by some complaints I'd been receiving in the initial experiments that I'd been doing. I designed a fun little experiment just to kind of see for myself how things would pan out. This was about 4 years ago now, just a few months after I started Brewlosophy. So, really, I was kind of a new into this whole realm of things. Something I found myself thinking about a lot, particularly in regards to the triangle test, was the way in which a person's expectation of a difference influences their perceptions. So not just expectation overall, but I was really trying to hone in on how people respond to the triangle test, knowing that there is at least one beer in this of these three that is supposed to be different. Now, in a typical triangle test, a person is served, just to clarify, a person is served two beers that are identical and one beer that's different. Then they're asked to identify the beer that's different. Assuming the beers are all identical, an equal proportion of people would be expected to select each beer, right? So, and because that's just how random guessing works. But if the thing is when this occurs and there is actually actually something different in one of the beers, that's where we can say with at least some confidence, at least that, that the variable didn't have a very noticeable impact. And that's stats. That's the way triangle tests work. Well, my curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to have my friends, all of whom had participated in a few past experiments, I had them complete a triangle test where all of the beers were identical, pulled from the same exact keg, served from the same exact growler. Now, going against standard procedure, I did include, and I wish I wouldn't have, and I guess I can always do this again, but I did include a no difference option on the survey. So the tasters weren't forced to choose one of the three as being different. So there was green, blue, and red. All three of those were the same. And then, tasters had the option just to say, nope, they're all the same. Again, technically, when you're doing a triangle test, that you're not supposed to do that. Now you've created a fourth option. So, but out of the 10 people, and this is kind of funny actually, out of the 10 people who I served these beers to, only one of them selected no detectable differences as the which was accurate, right? There weren't any detectable differences, and of all people, it was Tim. I think that's pretty.
Attaboy, Tim. Nicely done, man.
I know. Well, what's funny about it is I part of me was wondering, like, maybe it's just he's just like, I suck at this, so hey, the option is there, I'm gonna choose it, But so out of the 9 left over, 4 of them chose the green sample, 2 each chose red and blue samples. Totally not significant at all, right? That's the way randomness works. Every once in a while, you're not going to get exactly 3-3-3. Absolutely. So there was no significance, as there shouldn't have been. That was fairly random choosing. I then spoke to the participants after they did this, and we were at a barbecue at a friend's house, and I brought growlers along with me, and those were everybody who was there participated. So I spoke to the guys afterwards, and before revealing anything at all, I wanted to see what they thought was so different about these beers, and the responses were basically what we see every time we do these experiments, especially when, and this would be a fun experiment too, you kind of, insinuate that maybe people were right, and people become more confident in what it was they perceived. Tasters could very clearly point out what made the beer they selected different. And I thought, is that something you experience when you're at kind of post survey on a experiment data collection day?
I will say, like, whenever you end up telling someone that they were right, which I usually talk to people afterwards about like their experience, let them know if they were correct. And people are always relieved when they are correct. Like there's this breath out, like this exhale of, oh, thank God I was right. Because like I think one, because it's hard. Or more often than not, it's difficult. But 2, like I definitely experienced that. Like people are always hesitant to say anything until they know that they were right or wrong.
Right.
Especially in like a group setting. Like if you have a few people, like I think the max I usually do is like 2 or 3. I think 3 is like usually the max I'll go on people doing this at the same time.
Right. Me too. Yeah.
And then once they're all like finished and you kind of have to moderate and make sure they're not talking to each other and not looking at each other funny and like all these things. But once everyone's done, you like it's everyone is hesitant. No one wants to be the first one to say like which one they think it is.
Yeah, exactly.
But then once you say it out loud, once you like someone has made a claim, which I make everyone say it before I tell them.
Sure.
But once they do, then everyone starts talking. Then everyone's like, oh yeah, of course, because like in the aroma I got this. Like, okay, sure you did, man. I gotcha. I'm with you.
And my kind of jerk of a response is always when somebody's very confident about their difference is I'll say something like, well, what's interesting is when this one ends up coming back not significant, then we'll talk, let's see how, well, right. and the thing is that I think this speaks to, again, not intentional, not in a negative way, but this speaks to the pride that a lot of people in this hobby and industry really, I think, have in their tasting ability. People want to feel like they're good at this thing. And the reality is, palates are palates. And sometimes we're just not as good. I thought, for example, that I could taste diacetyl from a mile away. I had done an experiment where somebody dosed a Coors Light with like butter flavoring, and everybody could taste it. I mean, it tasted like buttered popcorn in beer. It was terrible. So that one little experiment, I thought I was like some diacetyl pro. And then I actually got some diacetyl flavor standard and did an experiment with that. And I was one out of like 12 people who just, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I knew, I could not detect the diacetyl in the beer at all. I could have drank either of the beers that were in the triangle test and it wouldn't have mattered. I couldn't detect it. Meanwhile, everyone is sitting around looking at me going, are you kidding me? You can't taste, I could not taste the goddamn diacetyl. It was just, and it blew my mind. This pride that I had developed in myself that, that I was this, I could taste diacetyl. I just couldn't. And I think there's a lot of that out there. So get this, in this experiment that I did, I go and I tell everyone, well, here's the shocker. Those beers were identical. No joke. The most common response was, "You're lying to us." No, they weren't. There's no way they were.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Let's say somebody chose the green cup. It was no. I promise you, there was something different in the green cup. Maybe it was the cup. Maybe the cup smelled different. And then the people who chose the blue and the red cup were sitting there going, no. There was something different in the blue and the red cups. I mean, we want so badly to not feel duped, for one, which I don't mind feeling duped. I think it's kind of exciting, but and we want to feel like we know what we're talking about and what we do. So at the very least, I think the results of this experiment, this fun little experiment, which I did, by the way, sort of repeat in an episode on the Brewing Network with the folks there. They all got served the same beer in the same fashion, and it was the same basic response. I forget what episode number that is, but if you just Google the Brewing Network Brewlosophy, you'll see a few episodes there, and one of them has this experiment on there. It's the same thing. If we're expecting a difference, we're probably going to find a difference.
Totally. And it's actually really interesting that you bring up, that you thought you could taste diacetyl like a mile away. There is a biological component to perception that exists, and by which we mean like palates are different. Your palate is different than everyone else's palate, and your sensitivities to specific chemicals and the way in which you perceive those chemicals is there's a ton of study on this as well, that, there are some people who are more sensitive to sulfur. There are people who are more sensitive to diacetyl, and those things for sure exist. And there's also like a lot of interesting research on, especially wine, where, you'll see some people in like these like trick experience, and, people who are trained sommeliers or trained tasters, they can also be tricked they can also like kind of get under these circumstances of, their perception being influenced by the subjective nature of just, perception in general. But they also tend to be less confident in their results when they're tricked, or they do tend to be, I think there are collective perceptions, right? Like that, this specific chemical compound is commonly tasted as blah, blah, blah.
Oh,
but
man.
That's the big part of judgment or judging. And like, that's the exact reason why you should always describe the things you're tasting and not the chemical that you're tasting, because you don't taste chemicals. You have your perception of that chemical, which is expressed as different things.
Well, and I think this we could go so deep into the.
I know.
What I've heard referred to as the slippery slope of solipsism. The reality. I mean, and this is the idea that I am able to objectively say, oh, that smells like cooked, like baking cookies, and everybody can agree. But how do we know? There's no way to know that what I experience as cookies in the oven is the same as what you experience. And you get into this mode of like, kind of like, oh shit, here we go thinking about this existential stuff. I love going there.
That is the dangerous point of nothing is real.
Yeah, exactly. Oh God. What are you, a nihilist? Yeah. So anyways, I'm having a great time talking about this stuff, and we've got even more fascinating research findings to go over when we are back from this break. Stick with us. Shopping for brewing supplies online can be a real hassle, which is why we recommend Love to Brew. They've got great prices, super fast shipping, and they carry exclusive products like East Coast Yeast, the Brewer's Essentials brand, and their award-winning beer recipe kits. They're also the only place you can pick up your very own Brewlosophy recipe kit. The numbers don't lie. Love to Brew has hundreds of 5-star reviews, and thousands of brewers are choosing them for their supplies and ingredients each year. Experience the difference at lovetobrew.com. That's brew.com. When dumping wort-soaked grain in leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, did you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge, and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brewbag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the super fast counterflow chiller, the exGEERiment, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to exGEERiment.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
The perception of quality is something that's been looked at by sensory analysts for a long time, particularly how one's views might potentially be influenced by their preconceived beliefs about what it is they're tasting.
So this is an excellent study done by George Tabor, and it's actually modeled after an older experiment that was done in 1976 called The Judgment of Paris, which is an incredibly awesome dramatic name for a research study. But in this experiment, in The Judgment of Paris specifically, Steve Spurrier was a wine merchant from Britain, and he did 2 blind tastings with 9 French wine judges, and he had them serve. He served them a bunch of wines. He served them white wines, wine from Napa, wine from Burgundy, and then some reds, and then more from Napa and more from Bordeaux, France. And then in that tasting, in a blind tasting, a wine from the Napa Valley was declared the winner, which is at the time insane.
Well, it was they were trying to come in. Napa was trying to kind of like T-bone the whole French wine thing, and
Right.
My understanding is that, and I'll have to admit I didn't go back and reread this, but I've read it multiple times before. My understanding is that the person who organized this event was like, all right, let's just go ahead and put this fire out. We're gonna have these really hoity-toity, high up wine taster judges come in,
For sure.
taste these wines blindly. They are going to rate the French ones obviously as being better, and we're going to get this thing out of the way, and people can buy their cheap California wine, and we'll maintain supremacy in the French wine world.
Yes, exactly, and it just bit him in a weird way. That's kind of the secondary study, right? But the study I want to talk about, modeled after the Judgment of Paris, is called the Judgment of Princeton, which was led by George Tabor, and George Tabor is a journalist from Time magazine. Or he was a Timeist, and he did this at the annual at the American Association of Wine Economists in Princeton, and he did a very similar experiment where he served 9 wine judges, and we are talking important wine judges, by which one of the individuals included was Odette Kahn, who was the editor of La Revue du Vin de France, which is obviously it's a big wine magazine. And then a couple of the American judges actually refused to have their name published after this experiment. But anyway, so he did this experiment with 9 wine judges they were from France, Belgium, the U.S., and he did French versus New Jersey wines, which you don't tend to think of New Jersey as like this excellent wine area, right? Even now, like when Napa Valley is like we think a little better of some of the California wines. The New Jersey wines definitely are not thought of in that way. So the French wines were actually the same producers from the 1976 study, A Judgment of Paris. And those were actually priced around like $650 a bottle. I know, very expensive wines, very nice wines. The New Jersey wines that were selected were much less so. They averaged around about 5% of that price, which, for those paying attention at home are about $30, $30 wine. Still actually kind of a nice wine.
Yeah, $30 wine. Yeah, I think my favorite wine costs like $9
right?
a bottle, but
yeah, maybe I'm like showing my hand a little bit here. That still sounds like a fairly decent bottle of wine.
I know.
But anyways, so the results were actually incredibly similar. The overall winner in each category from these 9 wines was actually a French wine. So French wine took the top spot, but 3 of the 4 whites that scored the top 3. So this would be 3, 4, 2, 3, and 4, because the first one was a French wine.
Right.
Were New Jersey wines.
Oh, I love it. I love it so much.
The second best. The best New Jersey red wine placed 3rd. So it took 3rd in the red category. And remember, these are wines that are $30, $35 bottles of New Jersey wines compared to these $650 top of their class French wines. They're taking 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in the white category, and they are taking 3rd place in the red category.
Man, you think about this I love stuff like this, as particularly when it comes to like quality. And let's be real, there's a lot of hype in the beer world, and I think it's beautiful marketing on the brewers who create these beers that everybody wants to, the whales, if you will. The thing that I think people will come back with, of course, is, well, obviously those tasters aren't as good as they think they are, because they, if they were true sommeliers, they would have been able to pick out the good ones. But sure. I just, again, you gotta suspend that bias and look at this and say it's just that our expectation, the way that we are kind of primed to view quality, which, let's be honest about it, the more expensive something is, the more we expect it to be good. That's cognitive dissonance is weighing in there. The more you invest in something, the more likely the more your personal investment is, whether that's energy or behavior or money spending, the stronger pull you have to justify that, to make that thing that you invested in a good thing, a worthwhile investment.
Yeah,
I give it to you. I serve it to you for free, or I tell you that it was brewed by me, and now it's like, oh well, it's free, and also this schmuck made it over here, so I can look at it as being less positive. Another little fun experiment I did that kind of goes along with this is I served people I forget what I think it might have been something like Firestone Walker Union Jack, a really easy to get IPA around here.
I love that beer.
But it was nothing crazy, but it was a good beer. I mean, it's probably one of my favorite commercial IPAs. Super solid beer. But I told them it was a homebrewed IPA by me. And of course the reviews were nowhere near as good as it would have been if it were Firestone Walker, which everybody here loves. And that's just that, you're primed to kind of presume things about the quality of something based on the information that going into it. I think it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. It is. It blows me away how variable these things can be. And I mean, and honestly, like it makes total sense, right? If you invest a 12-hour day in your brew day, and someone says like, hey, you can do this same thing in 3 hours or 4 hours, or what we've been doing with the short and shoddy batches is like 2 hours start to finish.
Yeah.
There is an inherent like, no, the more time I did invest in this thing, the better it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Which there's so many metaphorical equivalents, like time is money is my favorite, is a good one. That like that somehow like the fact that you've invested time or that you've done more of this thing is that it's going to be better, and that is just not the case.
Yeah,
like
my grandpa used to use that phrase "time is money" to tell me to, like, haul ass, buddy. For every minute you're out there doing this thing and you think you're doing it better, we're wasting money here.
Work smarter, not harder, Marshall.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this, the Tabor study that we just talked about makes me think of it must have been 15 years ago. There was an episode of 2020, I believe, where they did the same exact thing with coffee, and it was right when Starbucks was kind of hitting the scene, and that was like the expensive coffee back then, and they had all of these tasters from really experienced all the way down to just your standard, coffee drinker, blindly sample and rate like a panel of 8 different coffees, one of them being Folgers, all the way up through, the expensive stuff you can get at Starbucks or these other, boutique roasters or whatever. And lo and behold, the one that came in first was Folgers. The one that people liked the most, it had the best levels of acidity and flavor and all of this, was the cheapest one off the shelf, basically. Well, maybe not the cheapest, but the one that people make fun of all the time. I'll refer to as the Miller Lite of the coffee world, And I just think it's fascinating that when you are blind to, and now don't get me wrong, I think there are people are out there who will say, yeah, you know what, Miller Lite or Folgers or whatever it is, it does taste fine. There is nothing wrong with it. We don't believe in their business practices. And you know what, if that's where you want to live, then do it. That's fine. Yeah. I don't care very much about that stuff. I'll be honest about it. I care more about friendships with people and having a good time, but to each their own. My thing is that I think it's fascinating when people truly think, or perhaps they let their bias of their lack of appreciation for the way somebody runs a business, they let that get in the way of what they're actually tasting, but you blind them to what they're drinking. And hey, things come back, interestingly, with some curious results. So,
well, that's the interesting part of this discussion, right? Is that it speaks a little bit to the MIT beer study, but it speaks to these studies as well, where people like to look at these and look at some of these blind results. And this, I think people like us are guilty of this quite frequently. They like to look at these results and be like, you see, everyone was wrong. It's like, no, man, no one was wrong. Your biased perception of the world is not wrong in that capacity. It's just, it's still true for you. It's little t true, but it's true. And I know, I think we as people want capital T truth. We want this objective, somehow outside of perception reality, that, objectively, oh, this is always going to be true. This is always going to be better.
Yep.
It's just little T truth is okay, man.
And to a relativist, that's true. Capital T true.
Yeah.
but there's also, I don't know if true in my world, at least from my kind of philosophical position here, I don't know if true is the proper word. Were you right or wrong? There's a great book out there by Otto Rank called Truth and Reality, and he kind of distinguishes between the two versions. It's linguistic, it's very, very much semantic, but it gives an interesting spin on how the subjectivity of truth and the objectivity of reality, and kind of comparing those. But we don't want to go down that rabbit hole. We do. Yep. Bringing this back to beer a little bit. Our contributor Greg Foster had a very interesting experience during one of his experiments a while back. Before we get to that, I want to remind everybody about Brewers Hardware, who specialize in triclover compatible sanitary fittings, conical fermenters, kettles, and brew stands. Brewers Hardware offers a variety of unique items for home and craft brewers, including high quality stainless fittings at great prices and super fast shipping. They also carry everything needed for total electric brewery automation. Learn more at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. So a couple years ago, one of our original Brewlosophy contributors, Greg Foster, who unfortunately is no longer working with us, he was interested in the impact age has on IPA, and he designed an experiment using a very highly lauded commercial beer. Greg was able to secure multiple bottles of Russian River's Pliny the Elder, some old and some fresh. Now, we're going to save the actual experiment results for another show, but rather it's what Greg observed when he was collecting data that's relevant to this particular episode. So in order to keep tasters completely blind, he poured the beers. Not only did he he kept the beer bottles like in brown paper bags with tape over the top. Nobody knew what these were, but he also poured them out of eye shot of each participant. So each triangle, all 3 cups, were brought in to tasters. They didn't see what was going on. They had no clue what beer it was they were actually drinking. So once all of the data was collected for this, again, this was on beer age. This had nothing to do with bias in the beginning, at least. As we normally do, Greg started talking with some of the tasters and just asking them what they thought about the beer in general, still keeping them blind to both the variable as well as the beer they were drinking. And he started to notice something that people weren't, kind of going nuts over how delicious the beer was. So he started to intentionally mislead people. And I love this so much. He told people, and again, this is something I've done with the Union Jack. He told people that this Pliny the Elder, which spent years as the #1 rated beer in the world, basically on multiple lists, he started telling them that it was a homebrewed beer, a homebrewed IPA, which they expected, right? That's what we do. We typically do homebrew experiments. The general consensus among some 20 plus tasters was that the beer was pretty good, but nobody flipped their shit over it. They weren't going crazy. That is, of course, until Greg finally revealed the bottles. He pulled them out of the bags, brought 15 bottles with him out to the table because people needed to finish it. And what he told me was that the level of eagerness to finish these beers noticeably increased at that point. Once they noticed what it was they were actually drinking. Absolutely fascinating, totally predictable, but still super interesting to me.
I remember reading this one when it came out, and I just love that he did this.
I mean, what do you have to think about, what is it that makes that happen? The word that comes to my mind is good marketing, but really the word that comes to my mind is hype. Is that the folks at Russian River who I love Russian River. I think they do make some of the best beers out there. In fact, Vinny's going to be one of our guest Q&A folks coming up here soon. So this is no diss on them or no diss on the Alchemist or anybody else who's created these beers that are super hyped. What is it that makes us do that, makes us act that way?
Well, it's interesting. So I love like a more maybe local example for the Midwest people who are listening, but it makes me think of New Glarus in Wisconsin.
Oh yeah, man.
And maybe you're not aware of this, Marshall, like being from California, right? But New Glarus here, especially like in the upper Illinois area, like people are all about spotted cow. And which is their cream ale. New Glarus is cream ale. And whenever, like I have friends and I have family who are routinely in the southern Wisconsin area, and they will come back with a case or two of New Glarus because it's only in Wisconsin. In Short's Brewery, it was this way for a while. They I think like a year or two ago they expanded out to other states, but you can only get it in Wisconsin. You can only get it here, so you have to like stock up. Like you have to get this big thing of it. Which, don't get me wrong, I actually believe New Glarus, if not the best, is one of the best breweries in the Midwest. I love a lot of the stuff they do. I think they're fantastic. But there are also amazing beers here in the Midwest at the liquor store, and I do not see people walking out with cases of cream ale anywhere else. It's just it's unbelievable. So there's got to be something to that exclusivity and that hype and the fact that it's like a limited supply, or your experience of it is going to be like you don't. It's like this missed chance kind of fallacy. Like you don't. Oh, I could have gotten it, but I didn't.
That's exactly what I was just gonna say. I feel like there's this FOMO component to beer.
Totally.
And it's and by FOMO, for those of you who are unaware, fear of missing out. I remember. I mean. And I'm going to, I'll throw myself under the bus on this stuff. I had the opportunity back in 2014. It was late 2014 to go on a little mini vacation with my family and my friend Chris and his girlfriend. We all went up to Windsor, which there's now a brewery Russian River Brewery in Windsor. But a part of the reason we chose that was because we were so excited to head down to the Russian River Brewery in Santa Rosa. And we did.
Totally.
And we got there early enough to avoid any lines, and we got ourselves a nice table, and we were sitting there. And anybody who's ever been to Russian River or seen people who get their sampler, it is literally like 15 to 20 beers. It's crazy. If you get all of their Belgians, their clean beers, and then their sour beers. So we got those, and we're drinking every single one. And as you might predict, every beer was the best we'd ever had. And they bring out, of course, we both had to get a pint of Pliny, and they bring out Pliny the Elder, and it was this orgasmic experience. Oh my God, dude, it's the best freaking IPA ever. The thing is it really, for one, or am I really referring to my experience? Is what I'm talking about the gestalt, the entirety of my experience of being at this rad place with one of my best friends, drinking what is a very delicious beer, and just having a fantastic time. That has to play into it. Plus the fact that I'm not missing out anymore. I am now in the club of people who know what Pliny the Elder tastes like, or who know what the Alchemist tastes like.
There is so much research done on the way, like the quality of your environment. In your perception of things, right? And people always in restaurants is actually where a majority of this research is done, where if you are in a crazy nice restaurant, like very fancy, and you just paid $75 for a steak, you are likely going to think that steak tastes better than if you are at a dive bar and you get like an $11 steak and fries bundle. Yep. And it could be the exact same steak, and has been in a lot of this research. But people tend, like there's this your environment, and not just your perception of the environment, which we are going to get, like I love that subject and we're going to talk about that more. But just the quality of the environment, or your perceived quality of your environment, influences the way in which you see a thing. And so I think that's an excellent point, where I think the common argument we hear in beer is, beer tastes different in Belgium, or beer tastes different in Germany, or this style tastes different, which it very well may. They could brew it differently. There's a lot that goes into terroir. Then there's obviously like brewer's thumbprint, like it's being brewed differently. There's packaging, there's shipping. All that thing influences your perception. But another factor is that you're in Belgium, and that's also changing. You're there, you're on site, and you're like, oh, this is going to be this amazing experience. And that expectation leads into your perception of the quality.
Yeah. And I think that, of all things, we are coming up on the end of the show here. And I think if there's anything that we can kind of pull from the experiments that we talked about in this episode, Matt, feel free to disagree with me. It's just that our kind of innate, underlying, under the surface expectations of something, whether that's an expectation of quality, an expectation of difference, whatever that might be, it does have an influence. And I think it's a disservice for all of us as people who really do not only already enjoy beer, but want to enjoy it fully and more deeply. I think it does ourselves a disservice to ignore that we are being influenced. And I think we could all stand to humble ourselves at least a little bit and say, you know what, maybe it is that this beer that I'm telling everybody is the best. And we see this all the time. Well, you got to try, if you like that, you got to try this one. Well, but maybe they'll still like the first one they tried more than the one that you think is better.
Right.
There is a subjectivity to preference. And so to me, that's kind of what I pull from all of this. Now we are at the end. That's all the time we've got for this episode. And if you enjoyed this as much as we did, you'll be glad to know that part 2 of this series on bias in beer will be dropping next week. We've got a lot more to talk about. In the meantime, you can head over to brewlosophy.com to read about our experiments, as well as everything else we're up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through no middleman no more.